Hello everyone and welcome back to the DIF with another session that is live. Today we're going to talk a little bit about bees and how important they are to our food security, to human nutrition and so on. But you might have heard that during the past couple of years it has declined significantly and that it has many major devastating effects if it does so. Ultimate loss of these insects might have global scale impacts. Within those are wiping out crops, elevating food production costs, and compromising human nutrition. It sounds like a very bad thing, and our next guest might just have the right direction to go in order to have a part of the solution at least. Solar energy facilities specifically and solar farms are ought to rehabilitate these pollinator population. And in this session, we are turning attention to the solar panels and how the area around them might be the solution that we have been looking for. And to inform us in this matter, I have with me two guests. It's Rob Davis, the Director of Center for Pollinators and Energy at Fresh Energy, and Laura Caspary, Director of Origination for Energy Distributed Solar. Thank you very much for joining me, both of you guys. So I would like to, just before the conversation starts, of course, you might by now know that we're all about interaction. So please post your thoughts, post your questions throughout the session, and we'll make sure that it reaches the speakers and me as a host. So you can do this by posting your questions on the thinkdiff.co session page and by using the hashtag thinkdiff on Twitter as well. So Rob, I'll turn to you to kick this conversation off. The lives of our hardworking little friends have been compromised during the past couple of years. And as I said just earlier, it might have devastating effects. But why are we so alarmed? And what is the importance of bees?
Absolutely. And thank you. I'll definitely get right into that question. And I want to first thank the Ellen MacArthur Foundation for putting on such a fantastic conversation and hosting new and interesting ideas and helping them spread, not just throughout each country, but really globally, so we can exchange and learn from these ideas. We Fresh Energy found out about this idea from the United Kingdom, where it is a commonplace approach. But to get back to bees, what makes bees and pollinating insects so critical and so important to us isn't just that we enjoy the nature, the mindset that nature puts us in, the sense of calm and peace and beauty, but also the real direct value in terms of agricultural production. So more specifically, let's just picture a beautiful fruit salad. So some blueberries, strawberries, apples, and raspberries. And so in that beautiful fruit salad, you have the harvest representing more than 1,000 individual visits by bees to flowers. You see, each and every single one of those blueberries, to produce a marketable fruit, each of those flowers, those blueberry flowers, has to be visited 2 to 4 times. And each of those apple flowers had to be visited also 2 to 3 to 4 times. For raspberries, the number is more, 5 to 6 times. For strawberries, it's 20 to 60 visits for each and every single marketable fruit. Now, of course, fruits and vegetables, you naturally think about pollinating insects and how they are making hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of trips. But it's important to think as well about scale. So here in the United States, we harvest about 82,000 acres of blueberries. And each acre has about 1 million little blueberry flowers. So to just pollinate those flowers, bees, whether they're managed honeybees or native bees, have to make trillions of visits within a short period. So it's not all year long. It's during the period when those flowers are blooming in order to produce a marketable crop from those blueberry flowers. But it's not just the blueberries and the apples and the vegetables. It's also things like milk. You see, alfalfa, which is dependent upon pollinators to produce seeds and other things, is a primary feedstock for dairy cows. And in order to maximize the yield of coffee, you need pollinators. So there's lots of ways that we interact with pollinating fruits and vegetables, as well as other produce that has benefited significantly from pollination. In fact, just a single cup of coffee for folks maybe on the West Coast or having waking up and having their first cup of coffee, but just that single cup of coffee is a harvest representing nearly 1,000 visits by bees to those little coffee flowers. So it really makes a dramatic impact in our everyday life. However, unfortunately, the reason we're having this conversation about what's going on and what's happening with the bees is because of a complex intersection of lots of different terrible things, unfortunately. We have designed a system that is decimating bees and other insects by the hundreds and hundreds of millions and billions. In fact, research from 2016 by the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services found that 40% of pollinator species may be at risk of extinction in the coming years. And a 2017 study out of Germany furthered the alarm significantly, showing an 82% decline in insect biomass over 27 years. So the numbers are not good. They're very much going down. It's partly because of overuse of certain kinds of insecticides. It's significantly because of lack of habitat. More flowers. Whether they're native bees or managed bees, they need more healthy flowers in order to thrive. We see that all over the place in the United States. I mean, for example, with managed honeybee hives, as a federal goal, we have a goal of establishing only 15% of those managed honeybee hives to die every year, but the current average rate of loss is around 30%. And so that's a nice number, but what it really means is around 900,000 honeybee hives die every year as a lack of access to a sufficient amount of healthy pollen and nectar. But then there's other species like the rusty patch bumblebee here in the United States, which was for the first time added to the endangered species list. Bumblebees are at significant risk globally, as well as a wide variety of species of butterflies. So internationally, nationally, pollinators are getting an extraordinary amount of attention. It's easy to understand why. They're charismatic, they're important, they're in decline. And compared to other wicked problems that we face, whether it's global inequality or social unrest or thawing permafrost, we can do something about it. You see, this problem of lack of healthy habitat is accelerated when we plant more and more and more turf grass. Just here in the United States, we have around 40 million acres, which is around 16 million hectares of turf grass lawns, whether they're in suburban areas or urban areas or out in the rural landscape. 40 million acres. So that's the way things are. But we can think differently, particularly in the context of today's conversation. We can think differently. And it just reminds me of Paul Hawken's book. He's an entrepreneur and environmentalist. And he said, surely, as a society, we can design a system that profitably nourishes and enriches life on Earth. And so that's what got us as a nonprofit organization excited about thinking differently and bringing different opportunities to look at what's growing under and around the solar sites. You see, these are PV or photovoltaic solar farms. They don't get hot in the sun. They actually convert the sunlight directly into electricity. The price of solar has dropped by more than 99% since they were first used to power satellites out in space. And so because of these significant price declines, everybody likes cheaper and they also like better. And that's what's happening with solar, is that there's rapidly accelerating demand and interest in solar power because people love saving money and they love an energy production solution that has no moving parts. But we can do more. So when we typically think about large-scale solar sites that are built on agricultural land, we see that there's an opportunity to actually stack additional value. And so rather than plant more turf grass lawns or cover those sites with gravel, by doing something a little differently, we can create an extraordinary amount of additional benefit, not just for pollinators, but also for soil and water in those different communities. And so maybe I'll kick it to you at this stage, Laura, and or actually first I'll show some pictures about how these sites really work. See over here, we know that solar sites like this one in the United Kingdom and this one here in the central part of the United States just simply uses a different seed mix. And so by thinking about a high performance seed mix instead of a low performance turf grass mix, you're creating a more resilient, climate resilient landscape, and you're creating a cooler microclimate under and around those panels, and potentially lowering your overall O&M costs over the life of the project. And Laura has firsthand experience in designing and implementing systems like this.
Thanks, Rob. As you've heard from Rob, the environmental benefits of pollinators and agricultural benefits are quite clear. I plan to focus on a few specific aspects of this approach that help us unlock more solar energy and ultimately more ecologically conscious solar energy. So when you're developing any ground-mounted solar project, you generally need 4 aspects. One is land, which is typically leased or purchased. Interconnection, which is approval to connect the project to the electrical grid. Offtake, which is an avenue to sell the power, which is typically through a power purchase agreement with utility or something similar to that. And permits. So you have zoning or planning approval to construct and operate the project. It's this last item, which pollinator solar is a very helpful tool for. So the deep root systems of native prairie grasses are able to absorb a far greater volume of stormwater than the short roots of turf grass, which is generally the alternative ground cover. I'm going to throw to Rob for 1 second. He's got a really good illustration of that, actually. Okay, so you can see the depths of the roots, and you can imagine the stormwater drainage being much more effective through that deeper root system of the native grasses compared to turf grass.
This is turf grass here, native grasses.
So that helps with stormwater absorption and runoff. And so it's a far better solution than detention ponds or other alternatives for stormwater management. And it makes getting stormwater permits also easier for a project. There's also zoning permits, which are the general planning permit you need in most places, aside from the building permit. So we're presenting our applications to the zoning authority and presenting this project to the local community for the first time. Our experience is that they've been much better received when presented as a pollinator plus solar project, which with images of the vegetation that you saw Rob showing just a few moments ago, and just an electric generating project. These are generally farming communities that most projects of this type are in, and they understand the benefit to crops and the environment from additional pollinator habitat. So we've seen, as we've gone into these communities and presented this as a holistic approach to a project and not just a power plant, a very different attitude and approach from the permitting authorities. And so I speak to all of this to say how much of a difference it can make to deploying more green solar energy and clean energy when we come with a project with pollinators than without. A few of the other aspects I want to touch on. One is operating expenses, which Rob mentioned as well. A solar project is like any other, where we need to budget for both capital expenditures, which is the cost to develop and build the project, and operational expenditures, which is the cost to keep the project running for its 35-year plus expected lifetime. So if you mentioned, as Rob mentioned, if you place gravel underneath the array, it's not only a poor environmental outcome, but it's also much more expensive from a CapEx perspective. As such, standard turf grass is the more typical ground cover we've seen historically deployed with solar projects. But with turf grass, as anyone with a backyard knows, there's significant mowing involved. Multiply that by dozens or hundreds or even thousands of acres and many decades. And this cost of mowing and maintenance is actually quite significant. With native grasses, we select for low growth species, which are less problematic as far as interactions with the solar panels. So things that don't grow too high, basically, and grow into the solar panels, you definitely want to avoid that. It's critical to invest in proper maintenance by a reputable local firm who has the right expertise to provide the right seed mix in that area. And for the first 3 years in particular, we need careful maintenance to ensure that these plants establish properly so the seeds do take hold. We keep weeds out and they're cut back regularly so they don't go too high and interfere with the solar array. Now, after this establishment period, the maintenance costs drop off very significantly. So upfront seed and establishment costs are higher than the alternatives. The lifetime operational costs, talking about many decades, for pollinators are much lower. So So the first thing I mentioned was permitting. It's easier to get a permit and it's more community acceptance of these projects with this approach. Second is operational costs are lower. So the overall cost of the project is actually lower, we've found to date with this approach. Third thing I wanted to touch on was PR. So I've established through my explanation, we don't develop projects in this manner just for public relations purposes. It actually is better and cheaper and more environmentally conscious. However, PR has a value. It has a value to my company, but moreover, it has a significant value to my customers. So we've seen significant positive press and local feedback on projects due to this approach. And if that makes my customers look good and makes them want to purchase more solar power, then I've done my job and I've helped the environment at the same time. The other benefits we can stack onto this, we've had projects with beehives placed adjacent to the arrays, and we've developed additional, we've had people able to develop additional products from that. And I'm going to throw to Rob to speak to that a little bit more.
It's absolutely true. Thanks so much, Laura. And it's absolutely, you're absolutely right. In fact, I have another prop here with me. So grid cards with petition.
Rob Davis is
support
freezing
farmers
for a bit.
who seek to enable private sector.
Just see if it works. Rob, you were just freezing a little bit, so I'll let you talk again. You seem to be back.
Okay. So I was just sharing that I have about 300 postcards here collected from beekeepers. And the petition says we should all seek to support farmers who enable private sector investments in high quality habitat and forage for bees. When designed to benefit bees, solar arrays can provide the funding to establish and manage flowering landscapes while also improving agricultural soils and improving water quality. So beekeepers say loud and clear, landscapes that look like this and have these characteristics are of great value. One, they're not sprayed with insecticides, and two, they provide a great place to forage for diverse nectar sources. Now, a key that we have here in the United States, and we imported this practice from the UK, developers like Solstice Renewables in the UK have really helped us and informed us, advised us. Ecologist Guy Parker has some incredible videos that he's recorded many, many years ago walking around pollinator-friendly solar farms. But the important thing is that here in the United States, we've collaborated directly with some of the world's foremost entomologists to understand exactly what is helpful to bees and have designed scorecards so that if you are issuing a solar RFP or you are looking for a set of best practices, you can just Google search pollinator-friendly solar scorecard and find a simple one-page guide to ensuring that the vegetation growing on and around your solar farms is both meaningful and only incremental. So we don't want to incur extraordinarily high cost in seeds. We're not trying to replace every blade of grass with a flower. We're looking to do something that is meaningful for the bees while also being incremental and understanding that this is the managed landscape of a solar farm. Energy generation is first and foremost of importance. And for that reason, one of the things that we're embarking on as well is a collaboration directly with the National Renewable Energy Lab, which is a division of the US Department of Energy. And NG, Distributed Solar here in the US, has some solar sites in this study. It's a study of pollinator-friendly solar landscapes, looking at how vegetation like this creates a cooler microclimate, which in turn increases the energy generation from the panels. And so there's a great opportunity for the shade of the solar panels to increase the growth, which then contributes to this cooler microclimate and this positive feedback loop that benefits pollinators, it benefits solar, it benefits the economics, it benefits the local community. So then once you have a pollinator-friendly solar array that's both incrementally and meaningfully beneficial, then, as Laura said, you can collaborate with local beekeepers, and not just to do to produce honey, which is great. This is a beautiful feature story from the American Beekeeping Federation magazine about how bees find solar sanctuary. But also you can take that honey and bring it to other local partners, whether it's a brewery like this one, 56 Brewing here in Minnesota. They have this beer called Solarama Crush, and you can see the artwork is all about creating a flowering landscape on solar farms and then using the honey in this delicious, very, very tasty IPA. So that is a great way to engage people. There's also Milk and Honey Ciders, which is a cider maker that has used some solar farm honey to sweeten up one of their ciders. And I believe that that product is called Solar Sweet Farm Cider as well. So we've found, Fresh Energy has found, that there are a few people, civil engineers, clean energy wonks, that love the look of solar panels. Like, but most people aren't really into it. However, people do like flowers, and they like honey. They like saving the bees. They like saving the butterflies. People love beer, and people love cider, and people love engaging with food, because that's the full circle, is that we started with food, and we're going to bring it right back to how these sites can be part of creating an extraordinary and resilient food system. So it doesn't have to be about growing crops inside the solar farm. It's actually a great place for the pollinator habitat. And the bees, they don't mind the fence. They fly right through the fence and they visit the crops that are grown outside of the solar farm. So by growing produce, whether it's almonds or blueberries or apples or pears or pumpkins or squash around a solar farm, the farmer has actually more resiliency built in, because they know they're going to have the recurring revenue of the solar, and then their farm has more resiliency built in, because it's got the pollinator habitat to help the vegetables and the fruits and all the things that we love to engage with in the grocery store. Aside from that, I think that we're really excited and delighted that DIF is interested in this conversation, and that DIF was open to hosting this conversation. And I would just put it back to your community, that as we think about the millions and millions of acres that we are going to use for solar projects, ground-mounted solar projects, obviously there's going to be lots of rooftop solar, lots and lots of rooftop solar. But farmers are really excited about doing ground-mounted solar because it helps them diversify their revenue. So as we imagine that future between now and 2050, of having several million hectares globally of solar farms, do we want them to look like this, or do we want them to look like turf grass or gravel or something else?
Now, it's not just about design and how it looks. It seems like there's a lot of mutual benefits in terms of so many things, and there's so many people that are joining in and questioning the constellation of these things, but also just about the costs and so on. So I want to just quickly go through with you guys, because you have turned this idea into practice. Usually we talk about theory and it might work, but you guys have joined us to see that it actually works. So if we look at one of the questions here from Twitter, from Natasha, she touches upon the maintenance costs. Laura just briefly mentioned that maintenance costs are important, and how they differ between turf grass and these new types of seeds that you talked about, Rob. And I would like to see the vegetation itself. Does it bear any additional maintenance costs if you switch to this new ways of thinking that you're presenting, or does it stay with the traditional one?
Yeah, I'll take that to expand on what I said earlier. So a solar project generally has a 35+ year lifetime, and probably longer. And so in the first 3 years, it is going to cost more to buy these seeds and to establish the seeds, and the maintenance in the first 3 years are greater. But after that, it's significantly less. And we're talking about decades. So overall, we've found that to date, it's actually cheaper to take this approach because of the lower maintenance costs for most of the years of operation.
So who exactly is responsible for the maintenance of the vegetation? Is it you as a provider, or is it the beekeepers themselves, or is there a third party involved? Who takes complete responsibility or partial responsibility of it?
Yeah, so in Angie's case, as with most solar developers, we own and operate the projects that I'm talking about. And so we'll either have directly Angie employees or subcontractors doing all that maintenance.
And if we look at the just at the prospect of it, you have turned this idea into practice. Did you see any barriers that you had to overcome, some hurdles that you thought you couldn't but did, for other people out there to know as well? Because not everything is as easy as you seem it to be. So were there any barriers that you would like to mention as well?
I think the main barrier is making sure that once you get through, we're able to establish actually fairly easily that this is a cheaper, lower cost approach. And so that was definitely a big one. As an owner operator, it's easier for us than some developers to say we're willing to make this investment in the first 3 years because we know we're going to own these projects for decades. Other developers who are to flip and sell it to someone else, it may be more challenging to spend more upfront on a project they don't plan to own for decades and that someone else will own. I will say, but making sure that you do the maintenance right and having the right local partners has been really essential. So we've used in the Midwest here a company called Prairie Restorations, who've been phenomenal in helping us and being local experts in establishing the plants the right way, planting the right time of year, planting the right type of thing. Had we not had such a strong local partner, I think it would have been much more challenging.
And what I've seen as well is that for folks that have expertise or training in natural systems. So Laura, I believe you have an undergraduate degree in biology, and your civil engineer has had a couple of years of experience in designing LEED certified buildings, meaning he thinks a lot about high performance vegetation and how it can help remediate stormwater. So one of the obstacles internally at any energy company is just going to be understanding the natural world, that you need to have a sophisticated approach to what's growing under the solar panels as to the engineering sophistication that goes into the solar array itself.
So if we turn to both of your parties, you've both played an integral role in this actually materializing. Who takes the first step, Rob? Is it you as an NGO, or is it Laura as a company that thinks this is a good thing to do? Who takes the first step?
Well, we just imported this idea really from the UK. What we saw was that so many Fortune 500 companies, large entities, were so interested, and so many schools and so many churches. There was so much interest in solar that in our local community, we knew we were going to go from this much solar to this much solar in a very short period of time. So in this instance, we just cast around for research projects because we knew that if lots and lots of solar projects were built and they were ugly, then we as a society would have a significantly harder time building all of the solar we need to avoid the worst effects of climate change. So in doing that research, we found, you folks in the UK and found that this was a common practice, that it was already put into practice at scale on a lot of projects in the UK. And so that significantly de-risked it. And now we're 3 or 4 years into this idea of pollinator-friendly solar. And so we've already put several hundred megawatts in the ground and several billion stems of flowering plants in the ground on sites in, I think, more than a dozen states now. So in this case, it was an NGO that said, we see an interesting idea, we'd like to bring it to the United States and see it implemented at scale. And so that's been a core part of my job, is really collaborating with solar developers to make sure they have access to the tools and techniques and best practices, but also to make sure that beekeepers and conservationists and agricultural allies understand that photovoltaic PV solar isn't dangerous and scary, that it represents an extraordinary economic opportunity. And that they can see that, simply by asking for landscapes like this, that's how solar can be built in their own community. So there's an extraordinary amount of work to do. There's a lot of great questions to ask. It's exciting, definitely, that the National Renewable Energy Lab recognizes that this is a significant area of interest, that we can design flowering landscapes that improve the energy performance of our solar systems. And so they're leaning forward and are just at the first couple months of a 3-year study that NG Distributed Solar is part of. So we're definitely at the early stages, but that's the solar industry right now. But more and more companies, if you're in the United States, companies like Organic Valley, one of the largest organic brands in the world, and Cliff Bar. You know, if you're out there hiking and biking, Cliff Bar and Organic Valley are both powered by pollinator-friendly solar farms. And that's an exciting transition. And I think more and more brands want to be associated not just with 100% energy, clean energy commitments, but also the question of how is it done and what is happening on those sites, and can we get more for our investment and commitment to renewable energy.
And then an additional question to that would be, who enables this? And we just talked about the role of you as an NGO and as a company itself that provides solar panels. But then we have also a third party involved, which has been very much involved in the whole discussion about solar panels themselves, which is the government and their policies. And this is a question that we have from the session page at thinkdiff.co as well. How does the government affect these approaches that you are thinking of? Do they also play an integral role, and how can they facilitate this? Or are they interested in doing so? What is the situation there?
Yeah, we've worked, Fresh Energy has worked collaboratively with agricultural and conservation allies in a growing number of states, and actually established state law in 6 different states. It's called the Pollinator-Friendly Solar Act. And it basically takes this scorecard, the idea of what's both incremental and meaningful. So what defines pollinator-friendly in the context of a solar array, and has put that in state law. And we felt that that was an important step to build trust between the conservationists and agricultural community and solar developers. The worst case scenario is if this was just like a potted plant, right? On a 100-acre field, if this was just some PR with some flowers up front and then a bunch of gravel on the rest of the project. But the entire site looks like this. So, so the government plays an important role in helping establish fair and flexible and science-based standards. And so we've played a role in helping them understand what constitutes pollinator friendly, helping ensure that we're connecting the most experienced solar developers with those constituencies. But in terms of like, do we need an incentive? I mean, maybe, Laura, I'll let you speak to that. I mean, maybe the incentive is you're able to talk to those local communities.
Yeah, we don't need anything additional. It's just a win-win-win for the developer.
And when I just read a little bit about the situation before talking to you guys, I saw a lot of developments happening in the policy perspective in the US, where Illinois has passed some legislation to facilitate this idea, and also Maryland and Minnesota had done something. Can you see such developments being more widespread in the US right now and also globally, or what are the prospects according to you?
We know that pollinator-friendly solar was imported from the UK into Minnesota and is now spread to the Northwest, the Southeast, the Northwest, parts of the United States. It's quite a bit harder to do in the dry and arid climate of Arizona or Central Valley, California. You have greater concerns, obviously, about fire risk and other things there. But just about everywhere that plants grow, there are local pollinators. And so if you're able to see what the native plants in that community are, identify the species that are low growing, that grow below that lower edge of the solar array, and then procure enough of that species to make a meaningful contribution to the pollinators, that's a great opportunity. And we see it spreading. Like Laura said, it's really a win-win-win.
So if we can boil this down to some practical ideas and just some practical suggestions on how people can move with this forward, what would your considerations be there? What should people take into consideration when moving on with making more pollinator-friendly solar farms?
Sure. First and foremost, as you're procuring more solar, whether you're a utility or corporation, just either reach out via our information here at the end of the conference and ask us some questions about how to go faster. And we'll advise you on how to use the pollinator-friendly solar scorecard to ensure that the solar farms that you are building or you're having your partners build end up making a meaningful contribution in the lives of pollinators. So that's the first and maybe most important thing. It's also really easy.
And Laura, you as a practitioner, do you have any ideas on just from the practical side, as a company that provides these solar farms, how do you think other people should think about this as well?
Yeah, I'd say for a developer, the reality is the first thing to pay attention to, and the first thing I focused on was making the cost argument, making the argument that this is actually going to save us money. And from there, you can stack on all the other benefits and explain that. But that's kind of where I started, and it worked for us.
All right, thank you both for this conversation. I mean, time flies fast, and we have had a lot of information from you guys, so we'll be able to catch with this up as well after this discussion. So please head back if you have missed something. There was a lot of interesting things that we've talked about, and the importance of bees is there. We have them as 75% of global food production and just human food crops worldwide. So there's an importance, and solar farms, as Rob and Laura talked to us today, provide a direction, at least, to a solution to save these bees in very important parts, integral to food security worldwide. So thank you again, you two guys, for joining us, and thanks everyone out there who has joined the discussion. So we have one more live session tonight, so please join that as well, and head to thinkdif.co for all of our content that we have. We have films, we have podcasts as always, so please head there, and see you very soon again.